Jesus is the sacrifice. That's what every book in the Old Testament is pointing towards. Matter of fact, when we go back to Genesis 22, God tells Abraham had a son, an only son named Isaac, who was a miracle child. And he was an only son, and God says, Abraham, sacrifice your son. And Abraham, he didn't want to sacrifice his son, you can imagine, but Abraham loved God and he wanted to obey God, so he, as crazy as that, he did what God told him to do. He bound Isaac, put him on the altar, raised his knife, in the last moment God said, stop. This is not about sacrificing your son. I'm providing a ram in the thicket. It was a substitute. It was a substitute for your son. All of that was not about Abraham. It was about God saying, let me tell you what's going to happen. This lamb, this sacrificial system, I'm going to put my only son on the altar, on the cross, and he's going to be sacrificed as a substitute for the sin of those who believe in him. That's what Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac was all about. It was pointing to Jesus' sacrifice. You go to the Exodus. We read through the book of Exodus. We studied the book of Exodus, and God redeemed Israel from Egyptian slavery by 10 plagues. The final plague was what we call the Passover Plague. It was God came through. He told the Israelites, I want you to take a year-old spotless lamb. It was a year old because a year old was in the prime of its life, and 33 at Jesus in the prime of his life, it was spotless because it was represented sinless perfection, and Jesus was sinless. And so he said, take a year-old spotless lamb, slaughter it, consume it all, put the blood on the door frames of your house. You think, man, that sounds like something off The Walking Dead. What's that all about? Well, it was a symbol. God was saying, I see the blood, I pass over. It was not just about, well, I don't know, I'm coming up with a cool way to recognize who's Israel and who's Egypt. And no, it wasn't about that at all. It was a way for God to say, I'm pointing to something. He was pointing, that lamb was a substitute, and he was pointing toward Jesus. That's what every book in the Old Testament is about. It's what every book points to. It points to the sacrifice of Jesus. And then we come to Hebrews chapter 9, and here's what Hebrews 9 says, talking about Jesus. The writer says, he, Jesus, entered once for all, look at this, once for all, into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctified for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So what we see is the Old Testament sacrifices. They were temporary and they were symbolic. That's why they were over and over and over and over again. Because they were temporary and they were symbolic. But Jesus' sacrifice was once for all.